Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holacek, Ukrainian scholar and philosopher, historian, prolegomενist, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Eye on Ukraine. And today I want to talk about a book that I have just finished. It's titled Putin's Obsession with Ukraine, as you can see, an Ahabian Affair. What was the motivation for this book? Why did I write it? Well, the title, the principal title, of course, gives away my intention. My intendment is just to come to grips with Putin's Ukraine. And I give all of his arguments, and I look at that in great detail. And the secondary title, An Ahabian Affair, I'll talk about in a bit. But let's go on to look at the table of contents. It's a short book, about 200 pages. In the first part, I have a look at Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin's rise to power, his political philosophy, insofar as he has one, and a psychoanalytical perspective of Vladimir Putin. And I think chapters 2 and 3 are necessary if we want to understand Putin is, why Putin does the things that he aims to do. In the last episode, I talked about we can't have a lasting or just peace if we between Russia and Ukraine, which goes back at least to the middle of the 17th century. And some of you have seen that. And if you haven't, please watch it. It's very informative. And I think that's one of the huge problems with Donald Trump, with J.D. Vance, his puppet, and the other puppet, Witkoff, and other people that are Rubio. Don't know how naive Rubio is about events. I suspect he's not as naive as the others, but he's increasingly out of the picture. He'll be out of the picture permanently, probably in a few months. No one who works for Trump ever works permanently, so that's not a bold prediction. The thesis of this book is that Putin is a person in many respects obsessed with to its days of greatness. He sees himself as another Peter the Great. As I mentioned, Peter the Great could have been as tall as 6'7" by some scholars. And Putin is 5'6" at best, maybe half-inch tall or so forth. So it's sort of ironic that he sees himself as a Peter the Great, but he wants to restore Russia to its former greatness. I think this is almost astonishing in many respects, because what I argue at the end of the book is that there is Putin actually paints himself in the corner. There's an existential crisis due to the tremendous poverty of Russia, the economic downturn and collapse. It's a matter of months before I think the whole thing blows up in his face. I think there'll be a massive revolution in Russia. The soldiers don't want to fight anymore. They don't understand why they're fighting. The money is drying up. It's a military economy, but 40-something% of all economic concerns pointing in the military direction. So the argument of the book is that he sees himself as the leader, as another Peter the Great, restoring Russia to its former greatness, what I call military muscularity or muscular militarism. And the irony is, of course, he's going to be known as the leader who literally destroyed the Russian nation. Whatever happens is going to take, it will take decades for Russia to recover economically. There are a number of videos talk about that couples can't even afford to have one child because it's impossible for them to make ends meet on the money that they're making for the jobs that they have. If they don't have 3 or 4 jobs to have children, they can't have children. It's economically not feasible. I mentioned before, one person interviewed said he had a heart attack and he was given the very minimum for disability, $62 a month on which to live. Of course, he had a child and couldn't live on that, so he had to move in with family and friends and so forth to survive. So anyways, the thesis is that here's this guy who sees himself returning Russia to its former greatness. He's going to be the person noted for turning Russia to its collapse, to its demise. It'll be like Sweden after the Great Northern War, noted for becoming a second, perhaps even a third-rate nation. Population is dwindling. So that's that for now. Um, Let me turn to what I want to talk about here. So again, I'm going to sort of recap what I cover in chapter one of the book to some extent and introduce you here to Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. He is a person who was, he's a KGB, understood through and throughout that he'd always be KGB. And what the KGB taught him is secrecy, is quiet, as a term, diplomacy, regard for minutiae. Take details are so critical. This power play between Putin and Trump, by the way, that's going on right now, where Putin is wrapping Trump around his finger. It's almost laughable. I was apprised of a recent deed by the Kremlin, a brilliant deed by Putin. Witkoff comes back and he tells, after meeting with Putin, he tells Trump, he says, you know, he really likes you. He considers you a friend. He said that when the bullet hit you and grazed you, he went and he prayed for you. He prayed for Donald Trump. He was so moved by the possibility he might lose his friend. And Putin brilliantly, and I say this not facetiously, but honestly, commissioned a portrait of Donald Trump by one of the most famous Russian painters, a portrait of Donald Trump to be given to Trump as a present. What a brilliant maneuver. You placate his ego, right? What could he want more than a picture of himself, right? All right, so I'm going to be a lot in this referring to a book called, here it's first person, it's a biography of Vladimir Putin, the astonishingly frank self-portrait by Russia's president. This was put out when Putin was just in his early years. It was a sort of introduction to Putin, to the Russian, of Putin to the Russian people and to the global community of people as well, trying to give you some idea of who Putin is. And one should not take this so seriously because it's really, you know, there are some penetrating questions asked by the three reporters asking questions throughout. But nonetheless, it's meant to give people a glowing picture of the person who's a flawed person at times, but nonetheless, he is a person abundantly qualified to lead the Russian country. So Putin tells us early on, and he's proud of this, that he was, as a young boy, a thug. He says, I was a hooligan, not a pioneer. I really was a bad boy. And he says he was relatively uninspiring. He turned to judo and other sorts of arts of that way. He thought karate was not manly. He didn't get to grab people, punch them, kick them, throw them down, whatever. So he thought karate was sort of feminine. You know, he tells us early on that he was under the spell of novels and movies. He says, when I was in the ninth grade, I was influenced by films and books, and I developed a desire to work for the KGB. Now, notice this last sentence. There's nothing special about that. Putin typically, when he says something revelatory, qualifies it by, you know, this is nothing interesting. It's not important. There's nothing special about that, as he says here. And that's noteworthy. I'll talk about that part in this series when I talk about the psychoanalytical depiction of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. This qualifying in psychoanalytic terms, I want to emphasize when we qualify a remark, you know, I say, I really hate that person. And I say, I really didn't mean that. No, you can almost take it as an axiom when someone adds, I really didn't mean that. No, I really did mean that. So when he says there's nothing special about that, what Putin was telling us, this is something that's very, very important, understanding the person I am. Now, he idolized early on a Bolshevik spy, Jan Berzin, who was considered the founder of Soviet intelligence, founder of the KGB. And surprisingly, Berzin became a victim of Stalin's purges in the late 1930s. Who wasn't a victim of Stalin's purges? All of Putin's best friends. His second wife might have been killed by Stalin. I say Putin. I mean Stalin, victim of Stalin's purges. But Stalin's own wife might have been murdered by Stalin. It's thought that she committed suicide. But anyways, what did he learn from the KGB? As I said before, he learned ruthlessness. He learned regard for minutiae, but ruthlessness is so important. If something is worth doing, do it, pursue it to its very end. And this is where Ukraine comes in. He is literally obsessed with the capture of Ukraine, and he will, through the end of his life, see to it that he captures Ukraine, and he will die trying. I suspect the latter. He will die trying. I predict he will be overthrown, removed from office sometime this year, and he will be liquidated. You can mark that as a prediction, and I'm very serious about that. I speak of that because of economic collapse. So he learns how to put down rebellions through aggressive means. He learns the use of force, the use of sanguinary, bloody measures of acquiring things he wants. And we will see that as a pattern throughout that. He's not afraid to do what he has to do, even if numerous people get killed as a means to getting the task he wants done. All right. He writes of when he was 16, he went to the KGB and said, I want to become a member of the KGB, and they refuse him. He's told, young boy, you don't come to the KGB comes to you. So he's told to go to school, get a degree. He considers Leningrad University, the study of law. They tell him is the best preparation. So he doesn't get over this. And in 1975, the KGB comes to him. I should mention that Putin is born in 1952. So so you need to keep that in mind. So in 75, KGB comes to him and he writes, this is a very fascinating quote. He says, what amazed me most of all was how one man's effort could achieve what whole armies could not. One spy could decide the fate of thousands of people. At least that is the way I understood it. Notice again a qualifying remark. At least that's the way I understood it. He's reveling in this. He's luxuriating in some sense, in a weird sense in this. This is an ecstatic moment. One spy could determine the fate of thousands of people. At least that's the way I understood it. Right? It's like saying, it's almost like saying, oh, I told you too much about myself. Let me qualify it and downplay it. I really didn't mean it. Yes, you did, Putin. All right. So he goes to work in counterintelligence, and in 1985, he's removed to Dresden, East Germany. There's still the Berlin Wall and the partitioning of East and West Germany. And like I said, he's counterintelligence. And 1989, 4 years later, there's the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is a sort of existential crisis for Putin. He's located in the Stasi building in East Berlin, and his job is to keep an eye on West Berlin and get all the information he can, most of which is going to be collected and discarded at some point. But the thing is, with the KGB, you never know when a bit of information is going to be useful, right? This is something he learns. I pointed out, I think there's no question in my mind that Putin has something on Donald Trump, is why Trump, after their phone call on February 12th, I believe it was early on, is Putin's puppet thereafter, when he was, fairly aggressive in terms of talking about how to deal with Putin. Putin has something on Trump. That is something of which I'm sure. All right. So there's a large protest outside of the Stasi building after the fall of the wall, and Putin fears for his life, and he calls up his superiors and what should be done. He hears, and I quote, "We cannot do anything until we have orders from Moscow," and Moscow is silent. Now that last part of the sentence blew away Putin. Moscow is silent. Putin writes in the autobiography, "It was clear that the Soviet Union was ailing and it had a terminal disease without a cure, a paralysis of power." Keep that in mind. That is going to frame and shape his presidency. My presidency, he doesn't know it, of course, at this time, but when he becomes president, Moscow will never be silent. It will never be powerless. There'll never be a paralysis of power. It'll always act. Now, the KGB ends in 1991 with the fall of the USSR. So Putin runs around and does various jobs, working from St. Petersburg, works in St. Pete for a while. Then on March 26, 1997, he begins working for Boris Yeltsin, who is president of Russia at the time. And he removes to Moscow and becomes chief of Yeltsin's staff. At that time, Putin defends his academic thesis, which is titled Strategic Planning of the Reproduction of the Mineral Resource Base of a Region Under Conditions of the Formation of Market Relations. So this is an economic, geological thesis at the time. It's noted by the Brookings Institute that he plagiarized portions of that thesis. He successfully passed it. And it probably was known that he plagiarized, and it wasn't a big thing because a lot of people plagiarized at the time. If they had to take everyone to task who was plagiarizing, there would not be a lot of people getting their degrees. But anyways, there were 16 pages and 6 charts, which were directly taken from an American text titled Strategic Planning and Policy, right, which was published in America. So at some point, 1998, July 25, he becomes director, overseer of the FSB, which is what morphs the KGB with the fall of the USSR collapses. Now we have the FSB, the Russia's Federal Security Service. He becomes the overseer and director of that. So he is a very prominent person in espionage concerns. August 9, 1999, Yeltsin co-opts Putin for his prime minister. Now, Putin, his reign as presidency was rather rough. He was known for his bibulousness, his drunkenness, outrageous behavior. And he tries out 4 different prime ministers, none of whom work. He calls this prime ministerial poker. And he settles on Vladimir Putin, right? On December 31, which is a very important day in Russia, Russia doesn't so much celebrate Christmas because of the atheism of the USSR. They realized they needed something to replace Christmas, cleverly understood that, so they made New Year's the really day of the great celebration. And New Year's Eve was the day where the president generally comes on TV and wishes people, a happy new year and success in the new year and so forth. It's a very important day. Yeltsin comes on TV and he announces stunningly his retirement. Now, this perhaps should have been foreseen because he had ended his second term, and the Russian Constitution does not allow for a person to run for 3 terms. Of course, he could have done some finagling, as Putin did with the Constitution during his tenure as president, after his 2 terms, become the prime minister and then change the Constitution in clever ways so that he can be, in effect, president for life. That's an option for Yeltsin, but his approval ratings were abysmally low, and it just didn't seem in the cards. He's convinced to hand the baton to someone else, and he hands it to his then Prime Minister Vladimir Putin. Okay, he's sworn in as president on May 17, 2000. This is a sort of strange person to get the job because there are clearly people with a bit more charisma, better camera presence, and higher intelligence and better equipped to deal with Russian affairs. But Yeltsin chooses Putin, his 5th choice. And this is what Yeltsin says of Putin. He's a solid man who has kept well abreast of various subjects under his purview. That is not an extraordinary, right, slap on the back endorsement about the credentials of Putin. He's solid. He's kept well abreast, not extraordinarily abreast, well abreast of various subjects, not all subjects, under his purview. So the subjects about which he's concerned, he's kept well abreast, and solidly so. What about all the other subjects that are pertinent to be president of Russia and so forth? So it's really not saying a lot. It's probable that he's elected president with oligarchical support, and he is, supported by oligarchs like Boris Berezovsky, who says of Putin, here's another quote, "I've never found Putin interesting as a person." And Berezovsky was exiled in London. Putin turned on him, of course. Former KGB general Oleg Kalugin says he was a faceless, colorless nonentity. He never impressed anyone with anything. Putin himself didn't know if he was up for the job. He says Boris Nikolaevich, he says, to be honest, I don't know if I'm ready for this or whether I want it because it's rather difficult fate. What he's saying here, without question, he doesn't know if he's up for the job. And Yeltsin placates it by saying, look, that is something I too felt in my days. So don't feel bad. It's a daunting job. It's a tough job. But I too felt that. I'm going to bring up a picture of Putin here, younger days, KGB days. Notice the sternness of expression, the seriousness, the sobriety. Doesn't look like a friendly person. Here is Putin on taking office. We'll go back to this picture. There is a large contrast between Putin and Yeltsin, right? Putin is a large, robust, often unhingedly bibulous person, right? That is not the case with Putin. Look at his eyes, very serious, very unfriendly, almost icy cold. There is a sort of haughty contempt in that face, and we're to see it in future episodes. He is contemptuous. He looks down upon other people. He's superior to other people. So we have here a picture of a person who is really quite serious, and you can see that he is not very people friendly. He would be a person on his own who would have a very difficult job gaining public support for the presidency. All right, so on January 1, he wins 53% of the vote. On the first ballot, over 50%. So there doesn't have to be a runoff between the two highest vote getters. How does he get that? We'll talk about that in a bit. Now, Bill Clinton calls him up and congratulates him for winning the presidency. And there's a lot of, what do I want to say? There's a lot of hopefulness about future relations between the U.S. and Russia being good, the two nuclear superpowers. Clinton said, I wanted to call just to reaffirm my commitment to our partnership and to work with you. I know that we still have some differences in our relationship, and you know what our concerns are about Chechnya and the Caucasus, right? Russia, when Putin is prime minister, he all-out war against Chechnya. Chechnya is mostly Muslim, part of the Soviet Union. They want independence, and Yeltsin doesn't want that. Putin goes in and curries favor with Yeltsin by just bombing the hell out of Chechnya. And again, let's bring up a slide in the one I had up before to show the extent to which the capital, Grozny, is just decimated. Previous slide here. Right, here's the capital, Grozny. You can see the extent to which the aerial assault just destroys Grozny. There were hundreds of thousands of Chechens migrating out of Chechnya as a consequence of this. So a problem with this almost entirely Muslim sort of polity within the Soviet Union, within Russia, wanting its independence. Yeltsin says no, and Putin shows, yeah, I'm going to show my power by these people. All right. So Clinton says, I want to say that I hope we'll have a nearby chance to meet and talk. I know you have a campaign to run over the next 90 days, but we're eager to be a constructive partner. There's so many things we have to do in the future, but I think we can have a very good year, and I'm committed to doing that. Putin replies, President Yeltsin did a lot to destroy the communists and push Russia towards the civilized countries. In other words, the democratic countries of the West. The direction of Russian policies in all areas will continue in the coming 3 months while I am acting president. A lot will depend on the person elected president. However, I believe that will be a progressive person. This is talking about himself in the third person. On March 27th, Clinton calls again to congratulate him. He warns him, however, about Chechnya. You know, he's concerned about the aggressive policies in Chechnya, the murdering of a lot of innocent people. And he's also worried about a proposal to reduce nuclear weaponry. And okay, so he becomes president. As I said, we look at his picture. These are the epithets I use in my book: sternness, severity, condescending superiority, coolth, and it mentioned a sort of pouty contempt. When you look at his picture, I think that epithet just sprung to mind. There's a contempt, but it's pouty. He's a cold person, and his first person, his biography, his teacher says there was no lovey-dovey stuff in their house when Putin was aboard. He is a manly man. So now when I call his political thinking muscular militarism, what I mean by that, Putin is a macho person. I mean, talk about the Napoleon complex, and I'll talk about that in the third lecture on this series. He's a small man, but he does judo and sambo, all these sorts of manly sports where you can toss and throw people and hurt people. And he's always seen doing manly deeds, as we'll see in episode 3 of this. All right. So in the first 2 terms of his presidency, Putin has a sort of Western outlook. He meets with Clinton. He's impressed with Clinton, as we'll talk about later. He is greatly impressed because at a meeting of many nations together, Putin comes out, singles out. I mean, Clinton comes and singles out Putin, wants to talk to him, says, let's go somewhere private and talk. And Putin gets all excited about that. He's excited because it is the most important person in the world picking him out, presumably as the second most important person in the world, or as an equal, and they walk out of the room with everybody staring at them. Putin really liked that. He says, this is because this is perhaps why I like Clinton so much. And then he qualifies it again, right? Not to give any way. All right. So early on in his presidency, he showed all signs of desiring integration in the West. One of the obstacles, of course, was Chechnya and other presumably satellite former republics of the USSR that with which Russia is behaving aggressively. So there's a sort of distance between Western nations and Russia, built on sort of distrust. It's sort of, you have to prove to us by not acting aggressively and so forth that you are trustworthy before we integrate you in the affairs or in the network of Western nations, right? So he turns probably as early as 2003. Andrei Ilarionov says that 2003 is a turning point year where Putin stops looking to the West and looks inward at the Russian nation for answers to a Russian identity. He separates with the West through payment of all foreign debts. He wants to be fiscally independent, restoration and control of Chechnya. So he's just going to, he destroyed the Grozny and Chechnya. He's going to restore it, put in a puppet governor. Subordination, control, elimination of oligarchs as potential rivals. We saw that Boris Berezovsky, who funded much of Putin's election as president, is exiled, flees to London in 2001. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, too, is in prison 2003. He challenges the oligarchs who, uh, for the most part, would work in concert or own the president of Russia. Um, he challenges them, and he does so rather successfully. So he becomes the main oligarch, and any oligarch doesn't play by Putin's rules as he gets into his term of presidency is in real trouble, is in threat of being liquidated. All right. He appoints regional governors. We'll see that more. One particular problem he has with terrorist activities in one region where he solves the activity, and many dozens, if not hundreds, of Russians get killed in the process. All the terrorists, Chechen terrorists, presumably get killed in the process. So he solves that problem, and he mandates thereafter that all governors of the different principalities are going to be chosen by the state. In other words, by me. He's going to have his own people running things. Does that sound like someone in the US presidency right now, Donald Trump? Get rid of all opposition, put in my hand-picked people, people that are grovel and are subordinate to me. All right, so he wants to reintegrate the Soviet republics, Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Georgia, and so forth into the Russian, I'll call it the Russian Empire because he's aiming at empirism, right? And here's hostility to all the sort of color revolutions, the Rose Revolution in Georgia 2003, which will get definitively put down 2008 when he comes in and just destroys all of Georgia and puts in a puppet governor. There is the Orange Revolution 2004, where Ukrainians rise up, right, against Yanukovych, Viktor Yanukovych, and throw him out of office, where he's illegally elected president of the Ukraine. And Yushchenko then becomes the president of Ukraine at the time. So there is this idea of nipping any sort of resistance in the bud when there is a revolution. He wanted Yanukovych in 2004 to come in and just bring in the police and just fire bullets wherever you have to make sure this just doesn't happen. Terrorize the people. Don't ever let a revolution happen. All right, so by as early as 2003, probably as late as 2012, we'll see that Putin has a decidedly anti-Western slant. And that's going to get us to the second episode, which is Vladimir Putin's political philosophy, talking about talking about Russian isolationism, talking about his muscular militarism as a political philosophy, if you can call it that, his philosophy that is anti-ideological. And in the next episode, we'll talk in great detail about his political philosophy. And I use philosophy with scare quotes because it's really not very philosophical. It's sort of a justification for his aggressive tendencies, the sort of same aggressive tendencies that we saw used by Catherine II, Catherine the Great, Peter the Great before her, and all other sorts of Ivan III and Ivan IV, Ivan the Terrible, and all of the Russian czars who ruled with an iron fist. Anyways, we're going to his political philosophy in the next episode, the major players behind his thinking, behind his muscular militarism. And then in a third episode, 2 weeks from now, I'll give a psychoanalytic assessment of Vladimir Putin. We're going to see he's a pretty sick puppy. He's also a cunningly sick puppy who, through his training in KGB, really knows almost beautifully how to get what he wants. And he uses the techniques he learned in the KGB and FSB: patience, details, persistency, intelligence, terrorist activities, threats, and so forth. This is why I'm convinced that Putin has something over Donald Trump, who in the 1980s was in Russia, and it's believed secured monetary assistance for his fiscal endeavors, many of which just would always go up in smoke. right? I do think Putin has something on him. I'll talk about that more. Anyways, um, this is episode 14 of Eye on Ukraine. It gives us a background of Vladimir Putin. And next time, we're going to look at his political philosophy. Why is he so obsessed with Ukraine? Why is he so convinced he can get Ukraine? This is a cunning and dangerous person. And he's not the sort of person that should be taken lightly. I end with that. I wish you a good day. TTFN, we'll do this again next week. Goodbye. Hi, if you would like me to speak at your church, club, social gathering, or academic institution, contact me at mholowchak@hotmail.com. That's mholowchak@hotmail.com. Or we could arrange a Zoom conference discussion or meeting. Thank you. Have a good day.